The first howl tore through the mountain silence, not as a sound, but as a physical blow against her ribs. Elara froze, one hiking boot sinking into the rotten log, the sharp scent of pine and decay flooding her nostrils. The air in the Blackwood Peaks didn't just get cold at dusk. It thickened, becoming a syrup of shadows that swallowed the last crimson streaks of sunset. That howl was wrong. It wasn't the long, mournful song of a distant wolf. It was a ragged, desperate scream, choked with something that sounded like pain. And it was close. Crunch, snap, to her left. Heavy movement through the undergrowth, not trying to be stealthy. Panicked. Elara's breath hitched, a white plume in the gloom. She'd been stupid. A solo hike, a lost trail, a dying phone, a checklist of horror movie cliches. Now, the deep woods of the Blackwood Peaks were no longer a backdrop for her escape from the city, but a closing fist. Another howl, this one answered by two more from different directions. A triangulation. Her heart began a frantic drum against her sternum. She dropped into a crouch behind a thick fir, her fingers digging into the damp moss, the cold seeping through her gloves. Don't run. Running triggers the chase. The old advice from a wildlife documentary echoed uselessly in her skull. This didn't feel like wildlife. A shape burst from the tree line 20 yards ahead. Elara stifled a gasp. It was a wolf, but like no wolf she'd ever seen in pictures. It was massive, its fur a chaotic tapestry of charcoal gray and storm cloud black, matted with dark, wet patches that gleamed in the fading light. Its eyes, when they flicked toward her hiding place, were a searing, intelligent amber, not the flat gold of an animal. They held a terrifying, human-like desperation. It skidded to a halt, its sides heaving, strings of saliva whipping from its jaws. It looked hunted. Then it looked directly at her. The intelligence in that gaze was a shock. It dipped its head, a sharp, deliberate motion, and emitted a low, guttural whine that was more plea than threat. It took a step toward her, then staggered, a pained whimper escaping it as it favored its left foreleg. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footfalls, closer now. The wolf's ears flattened. It glanced behind, then back to Elara and did the impossible. It took 2 limping steps toward her, then turned and looked over its shoulder as if waiting. You want me to follow you," she whispered, the absurdity of the words tasting like copper on her tongue. The wolf, the thought came unbidden, chuffed, a short, explosive breath, and began moving at a limping lope away from the approaching sounds, pausing to look back. Logic screamed at her to stay put, to climb a tree, but the sounds behind her were now accompanied by low, guttural growls that vibrated in her teeth. They didn't sound like the desperate wolf. They sounded hungry and wrong. There was a wet, clicking noise with each breath, like bones shifting in a bag. Elara ran. She followed the injured wolf. It led her through a nightmare gauntlet. They crashed through icy streams that soaked her to the knees, the water biting like teeth. They scrambled over scree slopes where loose stones clattered like falling bones behind them. All the while, the pursuing sounds drew nearer, a relentless crashing punctuated by those distorted, hungry snarls. Her guide never let her fall too far behind, always pausing, those amber eyes checking on her, urging her on with a flick of its massive head. "I can't keep up," she panted, her lungs burning, a stitch like a knife in her side. The wolf doubled back, nudging her hip with its muzzle. The contact was electric, a surge of warmth through her frozen clothes. The touch wasn't aggressive. It was insistent, helpful. She stumbled on, driven by a terror of what was behind and a confused trust in what was ahead. They burst into a small, rocky clearing dominated by a sheer cliff face. A dead end. Despair curdled in Elara's stomach. She turned, ready to face whatever was coming, but the wolf was already moving. It shoved its nose into a thick curtain of ivy and moss clinging to the rock, and with a grunt, pushed its body through. A hidden opening. Elara didn't hesitate. She dove in after him, thorns and twigs scraping her cheeks. Inside, it was a shallow cave, smelling of earth and old stone and something else. A faint, clean scent like ozone after a storm. It was dark, only a sliver of twilight filtering through the ivy. She pressed herself against the cold rock, the wolf a large, trembling, warm barrier between her and the entrance. Outside, the pursuit arrived. The sounds stopped. No more crashing. only the heavy, rhythmic huff, huff, huff of several large creatures breathing just beyond the ivy. Alara held her breath. The wolf beside her went utterly still, not even seeming to breathe. His amber eyes were fixed on the veil of foliage. His lips peeled back in a silent snarl. A new scent invaded the cave. Musk, rotten meat, and a sickly sweet odor that made her gorge rise. Then, a voice. It was a ruin of a voice, gravelly and slurred, as if the speaker's mouth wasn't quite the right shape. Kale, it hissed, the name drawn out into a taunt. Little Alpha, hiding with your pet. The wolf, Kale, emitted a subsonic growl that Alara felt in her bones. The moon is almost here. Another voice joined higher, tinged with a mad giggle. You can't hold it forever, we'll have her. And then we'll have you. The Blackwood pack ends tonight. Pack, Alpha. The words slammed into Alara's understanding. This was no random animal encounter. This was a war. Touch her, a third voice, deeper and colder than the others, spoke. And your suffering will make the change feel like a blessing. Leave. Now. This territory is still under my protection until the moon crests. A tense silence stretched, thick enough to choke on. Alara heard a wet snarl of frustration. Then, the heavy footfalls retreated, slowly, fading back into the woods. For long minutes, neither of them moved. The only sound was Alara's ragged breathing and the soft drip of water somewhere in the cave. Finally, the wolf, Kale, sagged, his body slumping against the stone floor with a pained exhale. Alara's adrenaline began to ebb, leaving her shaking. She fumbled in her pack, her fingers numb, and pulled out her water bottle and a small first aid kit. You're hurt, she said, her voice trembling. He watched her, wary but no longer desperate. She saw the wound now, a deep, ugly gash on his shoulder, still oozing dark blood. It looked like a bite from something with very big teeth. I need to clean that. Okay. Slowly, she unscrewed her water bottle and poured some over the wound. He flinched but didn't pull away. She dabbed at it with a clean gauze pad from her kit, her movements gentle. As she worked, her fear was slowly replaced by a dazed curiosity. His fur was incredibly thick, coarse on top but soft underneath. The muscles beneath were like coiled steel. And his scent, now that she was close, was that ozone and forest smell, overwhelming the cave's dampness. Who were they? She whispered, not expecting an answer. What are they? The wolf just looked at her, his eyes heavy with an exhaustion that seemed far too profound for an animal. Suddenly, his entire body stiffened. A violent tremor ran through him, from his ears to the tip of his tail. A low, pained groan rattled in his chest, a human sound from a beast's throat. He scrambled away from her, backing into the deepest part of the cave. What is it? What's wrong? Alara asked, rising to her knees. The answer came not from him, but from the world outside. A pale, spectral light began to filter through the ivy, brighter than the moon had any right to be. A full, heavy silence descended on the forest, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Inside the cave, Kale began a change. It started with the sound, a sickening, wet crackle of bones realigning. He let out a choked cry, falling onto his side. His spine arched, contorting under the skin. His fur seemed to melt into his flesh, which itself was rippling, muscles surging and reshaping. The sounds were horrific, gristly pops, tearing sinew, ragged, agonized breaths that gradually shifted from animal whimpers to human moan. Alara watched, paralyzed with a horror so complete it was almost awe. This wasn't a magical, graceful transformation. It was a violent, visceral rebellion of the body against itself. The wolf's snout shortened with a series of audible crunches, receding into a strong, human jaw now clenched in agony. Paws twisted, claws retracting as fingers elongated, nails digging into the dirt floor. The massive form shrank, compacted, fur receding to reveal pale. It seemed to last both an eternity and a second. Then it was over. Where the massive, injured wolf had lain, now crouched a naked man. He was breathing in ragged, shuddering gulps, his body coiled in on itself. He was all hard lines and taut muscle, scars mapping a history of violence across his back and shoulders. The wound on his shoulder was still there, an angry red bite on human skin. Slowly, he uncurled, pushing himself up to sit with his back against the cave wall. He lifted his head. The same searing amber eyes from the wolf now stared out from a stark, handsome, and utterly exhausted human face. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and a mouth set in a grim line. He looked to be in his late 30s, with an air of grim authority that even nakedness and pain couldn't erase. Alara couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind had simply stopped. The man Cale swallowed hard, his throat working. When he spoke, his voice was rough with residual pain, but deep and unmistakably human. "You shouldn't have seen that." He looked at her, his gaze sweeping from her terrified face to the bloodied gauze still clutched in her hand. His expression was a storm of shame, gratitude, and fierce, protective anger. "But since you have," he continued, the words dropping like stones in the silent cave, "you need to understand something. The ones hunting us, they're my brothers. And when the moon is full, they don't change back." Outside, the first true, baleful howl of the risen moon pierced the night, but it didn't come from the woods. It came from the cliff above their hiding place. It was answered by another, and another, forming a closing circle around the cave. Cale's eyes locked onto Alara's, glowing faintly in the dark. "And they just found us." The howls were a noose of sound, tightening around the mouth of the cave. They weren't the wild, mournful cries Alara had heard in documentaries. These were guttural, triumphant, punctuated by wet snarls and the sickening crack of branches being torn aside. They were coming down the cliff face. Cale surged to his feet with a pained gasp, his body a tapestry of fresh scars and old wounds in the moonlight filtering through the ivy. He was shockingly fast for someone so injured. He didn't look at her, his entire focus on the cave entrance. His nostrils flared, drawing in the scent of pine, damp earth, and the unmistakable, musky odor of the beasts descending upon them. "They're here," he said, his voice a low rasp. It wasn't fear, but a grim finality. "The cave, you said it was safe," Alara whispered, her own voice trembling. She scrambled back until her spine pressed against the cold, unyielding stone of the rear wall. There was nowhere else to go. It was hidden, not fortified. Cale's eyes, that impossible shade of molten gold, scanned the shallow space. "They have our scent now. The rain's stopped. We're a beacon." A heavy thud landed just outside, followed by the sound of claws scraping on stone. A shadow, massive and distorted, blotted out the moonlight. Alara's breath hitched in her throat. "Little Alpha," the voice was a gravelly parody of speech, dripping with malice. It was the same one from before, the leader. "Come out and play, bring your pet, we won't hurt her much." Cale's body tensed, every muscle coiling. He shifted his stance, placing himself squarely between Alara and the entrance. It was a futile, instinctive gesture. One naked, wounded man against at least 3 of those things. "Stay behind me," he ordered, not turning his head. "No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, do not run unless I say run. The forest is their territory now. Out there you are alone." Another thud, another shadow. They were flanking the entrance. Alara could hear their breathing, harsh, panting like bellows. "You always were sentimental, Cale," a second voice chimed in, higher, crueler. "Protecting the weak, it's what doomed our pack, what doomed you. The Blackwood pack died when you chose the rot." Cale roared suddenly, the sound echoing in the confined space. It was filled with a pain that went deeper than his physical wounds. "You gave in to the moon. You let it burn the man away." "The man is a cage," snarled the leader. "The beast is freedom, and tonight we feast on the last remnant of our cage." The ivy curtain exploded inward, not with a careful parting, but with a violent eruption of shredded leaves and snapping vines. The creature that filled the opening was a nightmare of proportion. It stood on 2 legs, but was hunched, its body a grotesque fusion of wolf and man. Coarse black fur matted with mud and something darker covered its powerful frame. Its snout was elongated, teeth like yellow daggers dripping saliva. But its eyes were horribly, intelligently human, blazing with a feral joy. Alara screamed. The sound was torn from her, short and sharp. The beast Cale's brother grinned, a horrifying stretch of its maw. "Pretty sound," it rumbled. Cale moved. He didn't transform. There was no blinding shift of bone and sinew. He simply charged, a human projectile. He was impossibly fast, a blur of pale skin against the dark. He didn't aim for the body. He went low, tackling the creature at its knees. The impact was like a sack of stones colliding. The corrupted werewolf howled in surprise, stumbling back out of the cave mouth. They vanished from Alara's view, a tangle of limbs and snarls and sickening thumps onto the forest floor outside. "Get the female," the high, cruel voice shrieked. A second corrupted wolf, leaner and faster, ducked into the cave. Its eyes locked onto Alara, glowing with predatory intent. It took a step, its claws clicking on the stone. Alara's mind went blank, then crystal clear. The fear was still there, a icy pool in her stomach, but over it flashed a white-hot wire of survival. Her hand closed around a rock the size of her fist, a fragment of the cave wall that had come loose. As the creature lunged, she didn't throw it. She waited, her body coiled against the wall until the last possible second, until she could smell the carrion on its breath. And then she shoved forward, jamming the jagged stone upward with all her strength. It connected with the underside of the beast's jaw. A yelp of pain, more shock than injury, echoed in the cave. The creature recoiled, shaking its massive head. It wasn't badly hurt, but it was stalled. Its eyes narrowed, the playful cruelty replaced by genuine anger. "Little bitch," it spat. Outside, the sounds of combat were ferocious. Snarls, the crunch of bone, Kale's grunts of pain, and the deeper, roaring bellows of the leader. There was a yelp, and then Kale came flying back into the cave. He hit the far wall with a sickening crack and slid down, leaving a smeared trail of blood on the stone. He tried to push himself up, his left arm hanging at a wrong angle. Dislocated, or broken. The leader appeared in the entrance again, a gash across his furry chest weeping dark blood. He looked from the struggling Kale to Alara, who still held her rock, to his packmate rubbing its jaw. He laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "See, this is what we've become, fighting over scraps in a hole, pathetic." He took a step inside, filling the space. "It ends now, brother. We'll take your territory, we'll take your pet, and we'll wear your pelt as a trophy." Kale, breathing in ragged, wet gasps, lifted his head. His golden eyes met Alara's. In them she saw no hope, only a desperate, final calculation. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't run." Then he looked past her to the very back of the cave, to a shadow she had assumed was just a deeper recess. "You're right," Kale coughed, drawing the leader's gaze back to him. "The Blackwood pack ends tonight, but not by your teeth." With a final, wrenching effort, Kale slammed his good hand flat against a specific, flat section of the cave wall. A deep, resonant thud echoed, not from the impact, but from within the stone. It was a hollow, artificial sound. The corrupted werewolves froze, their ears swiveling. From the deep shadow at the back of the cave, a cascade of pebbles and dust trickled down. Then, with a groan of protesting rock, a section of the wall, a massive, cleverly fitted slab, swung inward. A rush of colder, stiller air flowed out, carrying the scent of deep earth and age. It wasn't a recess. It was a door. "The true den," Kale whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. "Run, Alara, now, straight down, don't look back." The leader roared in fury. "The ancestral vault, you swore it was lost." Alara didn't hesitate. She dropped the rock and dove for the black opening. As she passed Kale, he reached out with his good hand and gave her a hard shove, propelling her through the threshold just as the leader launched himself across the cave. She stumbled into absolute darkness. The sounds of the cave behind her became muffled, then amplified in a new way, snarls, a triumphant shout from the leader, a pained cry from Kale that was cut short. Then the thunderous, final sound of the stone slab grinding shut. Silence. Black, complete, suffocating silence. Alara lay on cold, smooth stone, panting. She was in utter darkness. The air was stale and cool. She could hear nothing but the frantic drumming of her own heart and the ragged saw of her breath. He had sealed her in, sacrificed himself to close the door. A wave of nausea and despair washed over her. She was buried alive in a mountain, in the dark, with God knows what. The urge to scream, to beat her hands against the door until they were pulp, was overwhelming. But she clamped her jaw shut, biting down on a sob. "Straight down, don't look back." Slowly shaking, she pushed herself to her knees. Her hands explored the floor. It was level, expertly carved, not a natural tunnel. The true den, the ancestral vault. Blind, she began to crawl. One hand in front of the other, knees scraping on the cold stone. The darkness was a physical weight. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The tunnel began to slope downward, just as Cale had said. She lost all sense of time. There was only the dark, the cold, the sound of her own movement, and the memory of Cale's shattered body and those final, golden eyes. Then, her outstretched hand met nothing. She lurched forward, catching herself at the edge of a drop. A faint, almost imperceptible glow began to seep into the blackness. Not sunlight, something else. A cool, phosphorescent green. Letting her eyes adjust, she saw she was at the top of a short, carved staircase. The light was coming from below. Step by careful step, she descended. The staircase opened into a cavern, so vast the ceiling was lost in gloom. The source of the light was now clear. Veins of faintly glowing moss or lichen traced across the walls and high arches, providing an eerie, underwater illumination. But that wasn't what stole her breath. The cavern was not a natural formation. It was a hall. Carved stone benches lined the sides, like pews in a cathedral. In the center, a large, flat stone rested, an altar or a table. And along the walls, set into niches, were statues. But as Alara drew closer, her heart hammering anew, she realized they weren't statues. They were skeletons. Massive bipedal wolf skeletons, each standing upright in its niche, silent and eternal. Dozens of them. Some wore tarnished silver medallions around their neck bones. Others had fragments of old cloth or weaponry at their feet. This was a tomb, a sacred resting place for the Blackwood Pack. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, a single skeleton sat upon a stone throne. It was larger than the others, its skull crowned with a circlet of tarnished silver and blackened iron. The Alpha of Alphas. Alara walked slowly down the central aisle, her hiking boots whispering on the dusty stone. The air hummed with a profound, silent history. This was the heart of the territory Cale had died defending. A sound, she froze. It wasn't from behind her. It was from the far side of the hall near the dais. A soft, pained exhale. Her eyes, now fully adjusted to the green glow, scanned the shadows. There, slumped against the base of the throne, was a figure. A man. Older than Cale, his face lined with hardship and grief, his hair streaked with gray. He was dressed in worn, simple clothes, and he was wounded. A crude bandage, stained dark, was wrapped around his torso. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Alara approached, caution warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This was another one, a werewolf. He didn't look corrupted. He looked human and hurt. She knelt beside him. "Hello," she whispered, her voice loud in the silent hall. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open. They were a pale, weary blue. He focused on her, confusion, then alarm flashing across his features. He tried to sit up, groaning in pain. "Who? You're human." His voice was dry as dust. "My name is Alara. Cale brought me here. She couldn't say it. The man's face crumpled. "Cale!" He closed his eyes, a tear tracing through the grime on his cheek. "My son!" The words hung in the ancient air. The Alpha's father, the previous Alpha. "The corrupted ones there above us." Cale sealed me in. He stayed. Alara's voice broke. The old man, Cale's father, nodded slowly, a gesture of immense sorrow. "He was always the best of us, the strongest heart." He looked at Alara, his gaze sharpening. "You are the reason he broke cover, the human scent on the wind. He led you to safety, even while hunted. He said they were his brothers, that they don't change back. A sickness," the old Alpha spat, the word laced with venom. "A choice. They embraced the beast, let it consume their humanity for the sake of power. They turned on the pack, slaughtered most of us in our sleep under the full moon. Cale and I, we were the only ones to escape the main attack. We separated to draw them off. I thought," he coughed, a wet, painful sound. "I thought they had him." "They do have him," Alara said, the horror dawning. "They're right above us, in the cave." The old Alpha's eyes widened. He struggled again to rise. "Then they will find the door. It is sealed from this side, but they are strong. They will dig or wait. They have his blood now. They can use it." He gripped her arm, his strength faint but urgent. "You must listen. This hall, it is not just a tomb. It is our legacy, our strength. The moss, it has a property. It dampens the moon's call. It is why we buried our dead here. It is the one place the corrupted cannot fully be what they are. It weakens their bond to the beast. A new sound echoed through the cavernous hall, not from the tunnel entrance. Thud. It was a deep, resonant impact coming from the wall near the dais. A shower of dust drifted down from the ceiling. Thud. Another. Something was pounding on the stone from the other side. Not from the cave above, but from somewhere within the mountain itself. The old Alpha's face went pale with dread. No, they didn't. Thud. A crack appeared in the intricately carved wall beside the throne, a spiderweb of fissures in the stone. The old mining tunnels, he whispered, horror-struck. We sealed them centuries ago. They must have found one, and they're using his blood to track the magic of the door. They're not above us. The cracking stone groaned like a living thing. They're already here. The pounding was a living thing. It vibrated through the ancient stone floor, up through the soles of Alara's boots, and rattled her teeth. Each impact was a wet, crunching thud of stone and claw, followed by the skitter of falling rubble and a low, eager growl that echoed through the vast vault. The old man, Kale's father, was already moving, a snarl tearing from his own throat that was more instinct than sound. He shoved himself upright, his body a tapestry of old scars and fresh, livid wounds. The eastern wall, he gasped, his eyes, the same molten gold as Kale's, fixed on a section of the cavern where the phosphorescent moss thinned. There in the old air shafts, sealed them myself decades ago. Alara's own fear was a cold stone in her gut, but it was smothered by a sharper, more immediate terror. The image of Kale, shoving her to safety, his blood slick on her hands, the sound of impact as the door sealed. Kale, she said, her voice barely a whisper against the percussive violence of the attack. He's out there, Vale. He is Alpha, the old man said, his voice a ragged mix of pride and profound grief. He limped toward the wall, his movements stiff but purposeful. His duty was to get you here. My duty is to keep you alive. Now move. He didn't wait for her. He shuffled toward the center of the vault, to the stone dais where the largest skeleton rested. With a grunt of effort, he braced his hands against the side of the massive stone slab. Help me. The command broke her paralysis. Alara scrambled over, the cool, damp air of the vault chilling the sweat on her neck. She placed her hands beside his, the stone rough and unnaturally cold. Together they pushed. The slab grated against the floor with a deafening, gritty screech that momentarily drowned out the pounding. It moved an inch, then two, revealing a dark, narrow opening in the dais itself. Down, the old man ordered, his breath coming in pained hitches. It leads deeper, to the heart spring. The moss is thickest there. It will hide your scent, dampen your humanity from them. I'm not leaving you, Alara argued, the city woman in her recoiling at the thought of descending into another unknown darkness. A huge chunk of rock dislodged from the eastern wall with a crack like a gunshot. Dust plumed. Through the gap, Alara saw a flash of matted, dark fur and a single, crimson eye, gleaming with malice. A clawed hand, too large to be anything human, wriggled through, scraping at the edges of the hole. You must, the old man roared. He turned to face the breach, his body trembling not with fear, but with a desperate, gathering strength. The air around him seemed to thicken, to crackle. I am Alaric, son of Borin, Alpha of the Blackwood Pack. This is my den, and I will not let it be defiled by rot. His voice boomed through the cavern, a wave of pure, defiant authority. For a heartbeat, the scratching at the wall ceased. Then a familiar, slick voice slithered through the gap, the leader's words distorted by a bestial muzzle. Father, you still draw breath. How sentimental. We'll make you watch as we tear his little pet apart. We'll use her bones to pick our teeth. Alaric didn't respond. He looked back at Alara, his golden eyes softening for a fraction of a second. Tell Kale his father died on his feet. Then he shoved her, not ungently, toward the opening. Gio. Another thunderous blow shook the wall. More stone gave way. Alara had a final glimpse of Alaric's form beginning to blur and swell, the sound of tearing cloth and popping joints filling the air, before she turned and dropped into the hole. She fell only a few feet, landing awkwardly on a steep, slick slope of stone. She tumbled, whirled, turning over, her cries stifled by her own arm as she bit down to stay silent. The tunnel was tight, damp, and utterly black. She slid for what felt like an eternity, the the sounds of the vault growing muffled, then exploding into a cacophony of snarls, roars, and the sickening crunch of impact from above. Then, silence. Not true silence. A dripping, echoing quiet broken by her own ragged sobs. She had come to a stop in a shallow, icy pool. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of minerals and that same eerie, blue-green moss. It coated the walls here in a dense, living carpet, pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. The Heart Spring. It was a small, domed chamber, dominated by a perfectly still, black pool in its center. The glow moss reflected off the water's surface, creating a starry, subterranean sky. The silence was oppressive. She could hear nothing from the vault above. Had he stopped them? Or had he simply bought her minutes? A cold, rational part of her mind, the part that had navigated corporate deadlines and city streets, kicked in. He said it would hide your scent. Stay here, be quiet, wait. But another part, the part that remembered Cale's blood warm on her hands, the part that felt the ghost of his push between her shoulder blades, screamed that waiting was a death sentence. Cale was out there, wounded, possibly dead. Alaric was above, fighting a doomed battle. She was hiding in a hole. The water in the pool rippled. Elara froze, holding her breath. A single concentric wave expanded from the center. There was no draft, no falling drop. The ripples settled. Then a voice, not from the tunnel, not from above. It seemed to come from the water itself, or from the stone, a whisper woven from the echoes of the spring. Here, Elara scrambled back, her back hitting the soft, mossy wall. Who's there? The blood of the guardian on your hands, you carry his scent. His vow, the voice was ancient, genderless, and thick with a sorrow that felt older than the mountains. It was not the cruel, mocking tone of the corrupted. This was something else. The moss around her brightened, as if in response. Who are you? Elara whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. We are the memory of the Blackwood. The first pact, the balance. The voice sighed, a sound like wind through deep caves. The rot seeks the source, the spring. It whispers to them, promises power. To drink these waters under the full moon is to become eternal beast, to sever the last thread of man. They must not reach it. The corrupted ones, they're coming here. They follow the blood call. The Alpha's blood you carry. They will dig. They will drown this place in fury. The guardian above his light fades. Alaric. A fresh wave of guilt and fear washed over Elara. What do I do? I'm not one of you. I'm just lost. You are found. The resonance in the voice deepened. The Alpha chose you. The pack's fate is tied to yours. To break the rot, the source must be denied. The spring must sleep. How? Elara begged, leaning forward. Tell me how. The seal is in the pool. The stone of the first Alpha. It must be turned under the light of the moon, but the moon's light does not reach here. It must be turned by one who walks in both worlds, a human hand, guided by a wolf's will. You have the hand, but the will. The meaning crashed down on her. A human hand. Cale's will. He had to be here. He had to guide her. But he was outside or worse. A shower of grit and pebbles rained down from the tunnel she'd slid from. A low, scraping, digging sound followed. Not from above. From the side of the chamber. A claw, sheathed in stone-gray fur, punched through a wall of moss and soft rock, not 10 feet from her. The second corrupted's voice, high and cruel, giggled through the hole. Little pet, we smell your fear. It's delicious. We're coming to play. The Heart Spring's glow flickered violently. The ancient voice became urgent. There is no more time. Go to him, or all is lost. Follow the blood call, you carry it. The claw wriggled, widening the hole. Elara looked at the black pool, at the impossible task, then at the encroaching claw. There was no choice. She had to find Cale. But how? The vault above was a battlefield. The main entrance was sealed. The water flows out to the forest. A narrow way for the desperate. Elara didn't hesitate. She waded into the black pool. The water was shockingly cold, biting through her jeans instantly. It deepened quickly up to her waist, then her chest. The glowing moss illuminated the water just enough to see a dark, low archway at the far edge of the pool, an underwater outlet. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filled her lungs, and dove. The tunnel was a tight, terrifying squeeze. She pulled herself along by the slick rock, the glowing moss providing the barest guidance. Her lungs burned. Just as spots began to dance before her eyes, the tunnel angled upward. She kicked, desperate, and broke the surface with a ragged gasp. She was in a shallow, fast-moving stream under a canopy of dense pines. The full moon glared down through the branches, its light harsh and revealing after the vault's soft glow. She was out. She was in the forest again, and the forest was screaming. Howls not of hunters but of agony and rage tore through the night from the direction of the cliff and the cave. They were close, too close. She hauled herself out of the stream, her clothes soaked and heavy, and collapsed on the bank. Follow the blood call. You carry it. She looked at her hands. In the moonlight, she could still see the dark, rusty smudges of Cale's blood. She closed her eyes, trying to still her panic. She thought of him, his fierce, pained eyes, the feel of his muscles coiling as he prepared to fight, the absolute certainty in his shove. A faint, almost imperceptible pull, a warmth in her palm where his blood had dried. It wasn't a scent or a sound. It was a feeling, a compass needle in her soul, tugging her to the left, downstream along the bank. She followed it. The forest was a nightmare tableau. Trees were splintered, claw marks gouged deep into trunks. The earth was torn up in great furrows, and there was blood. Dark, almost black in the moonlight, splattered on ferns and dripping from leaves. The pull led her to a clearing at the base of the cliff. The scene here was one of utter devastation. The hidden stone door to the vault was shattered, blown outward in a rain of rubble. Before it, like a fallen monarch, lay a massive, silver-furred wolf. It was Alaric. His sides did not move. His golden eyes were open, fixed on the moon, but seeing nothing. Around him lay two other enormous, twisted forms, corrupted werewolves, their necks snapped, their bodies still. He had taken them with him. Elara choked back a sob, her hand pressed to her mouth. The victory had been Pyrrhic, and it was over. The leader was not among the dead. A weak, pained sound, a human sound, came from the mangled entrance of the cave to the right. The original refuge, Cale. He was half-propped against the cave wall, just inside the threshold. He was still in human form, naked, and so badly wounded it was a miracle he was conscious. Long, deep gashes crossed his chest and legs. One arm hung at a sickening angle. His face was a mask of blood and dirt, but his eyes were open and they found hers across the clearing. "Elara!" His voice was a shredded whisper. "No, you shouldn't." She ran to him, skidding to her knees in the dirt and stone. "Your father!" she started, but the words died in her throat. Cale's gaze shifted past her to the fallen silver wolf. A tremor went through him. A low, broken sound of grief escaped his lips, more devastating than any howl. He knew. "The vault!" he rasped, his focus snapping back to her with terrifying intensity. "The spring! They're already there," Elara said, the words tumbling out. "They're digging into the heart spring. Your father, he told me to run. And then a voice. In the spring. It said the corrupted want to drink the water under the moon. To become eternal beasts. It said to stop them, the seal in the pool needs to be turned by a human hand guided by a wolf's will. My hand. Your will. Cale, we have to go back." He stared at her, comprehension and despair warring in his eyes. "Can't walk, can't fight him like this." "Then tell me what to do," Elara pleaded, gripping his less injured shoulder. "Guide me, I'll do it. But we have to move now." A slow, deliberate clapping echoed from the tree line. The leader stepped into the clearing. He was in his full, corrupted hybrid form, a monstrous, upright wolf, over 8 feet tall, his fur matted with gore, his muzzle pulled back in a grin of too many teeth. One of his arms hung limp, clearly wounded by Alaric, but his power was still palpable, a wave of malice that made the air stink of copper and rot. "A touching reunion," the leader rumbled, his voice a gravelly parody of human speech. "Father dead, brother broken, and the little pet giving orders." He took a step closer, his claws clicking on stone. "The spring calls to me, Cale. I can feel its power thrumming through the stone. An end to the weakness of flesh. An end to the shame of humanity. Eternal strength." Cale tried to push himself up but collapsed with a grunt of agony. Elara moved instinctively, placing herself between Cale and the monstrous being. The leader laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. "You think to shield him. Your mortality is a fragrance, woman. A delicacy. I will savor you after I drink my fill." "You won't touch her," Cale growled, the sound feral even from his human throat. I will do more than touch her, the leader sneered. He began to circle them, a predator playing with its prey. But first, the spring, you will watch, brother. You will watch as I claim our birthright and become a god. Then you will watch everything else. He was between them and the shattered vault entrance. The stream outlet was behind them, but it was too far, and Cale couldn't swim. The pull in Alara's palm flared, hot and urgent. It wasn't pulling her toward the vault anymore. It was pulling her to Cale, the blood call, his blood on her hands, his will. She looked down at Cale, at his desperate, golden eyes. The voice in the spring had said it. A human hand, guided by a wolf's will. She didn't need him to walk. She didn't need him to fight. She needed his will to guide her hand. An insane plan, born of desperation and that strange, supernatural pull, formed in her mind. She leaned close to Cale, her lips almost brushing his ear, her voice the barest whisper. Trust me. Before he could respond, before the leader could react, she did the only thing she could think of. She pressed her blood-stained palm directly against the deepest, most grievous wound on Cale's chest. His back arched, a silent scream on his lips. His eyes flew wide, not with pain, but with shock. Alara felt it too, a jolt, like a completed circuit. The world narrowed to the point of contact. The metallic scent of his blood filled her senses, then deepened, transforming. She could smell the pine, the loam, the cold stone, the distant water, the rot approaching. 1,000 scents flooding her mind. She could hear the frantic drumbeat of his heart, the slower, thunderous pulse of the leaders, the skitter of insects under rocks 100 yards away. And she could feel him, Cale's will, not his thoughts but his essence, fierce, protective, noble, and blazing with a love for his home and his pack that was as deep as the mountain roots. It flowed into her, through the connection of blood and touch. The leader paused, his cruel amusement fading into confusion. What is this? Alara raised her head. She looked at the leader, and for the first time she did not see an invincible monster. She saw a path through the trees. She saw the weakness in his wounded limb. She saw the most direct route back to the heartspring, not through the shattered door, but through a crack in the cliff face she had never noticed before. She saw it all with a preternatural, predatory clarity. Cale's will guiding her. You're not a god, Alara said, her voice steady, echoing with a resonance that was not entirely her own. You're just sick, she moved. It wasn't a human movement. It was a lunge, powered by borrowed instinct and desperate adrenaline. She didn't go for the leader. She hauled Cale's good arm over her shoulders, ignoring his cry of pain, and dragged him toward the crack in the cliff. The path her new senses screamed was the way. The leader roared in outrage and lunged after them, his claws slicing the air where Alara's head had been a second before. They stumbled into the narrow, dark fissure, Cale's body a dead weight. Behind them, the leader, too large to follow easily, began to tear at the rock, his bellows of rage shaking dust from the ceiling. The spring, Cale gasped, as Alara half-dragged, half-carried him through the twisting passage. It was descending, heading back into the mountain. You can't, he'll follow. I know, Alara panted, the sensory overload beginning to recede, leaving behind only the crystal-clear path and a bone-deep exhaustion. We have to get there first. They burst out of the fissure, not into the main vault, but onto a high, narrow ledge overlooking the Heartspring chamber. Below, the second corrupted werewolf had fully dug his way in. He stood by the black pool, his head thrown back, inhaling the humid air with ecstasy. He hadn't seen them. On the ledge, Alara helped Cale down. He was fading, his skin pale and clammy. He looked at the pool below, then at Alara, his gaze holding hers. The guidance was still there, a thread between them. He gave a barely perceptible nod toward the water. Her hand, his will. But the second corrupted was directly below, and the sound of shattering rock from the fissure told her the leader was almost through. Cale's eyes fluttered shut. His breathing grew shallow. The thread between them stretched thin. Down by the pool, the second corrupted lowered his head toward the water, his jaws opening. And from the dark tunnel leading to the main vault, a new figure emerged, silhouetted against the faint glow. It was smaller, limping on 2 legs. It was the third corrupted, the one who had spoken first at the cave, now in a more human-like form, his eyes glowing with the same rotten hunger. He held something in his hands, a rough stone disc covered in ancient carved runes. "The moon is at its peak, brother," the third said, his voice guttural. "I found the seal stone. Place it in the water. Let us be reborn." The second corrupted reached for the stone. On the ledge, with Kale unconscious beside her and the leader about to burst into the chamber, Alara knew she had one chance, one moment. She had to reach the pool first. The air in the fissure was cold and smelled of wet stone and the electric tang of the corrupted. Alara clung to the narrow ledge, Kale's massive, feverish weight pressed against her back. Below them, the heartspring chamber glowed with an eerie, bioluminescent light. The scene was a tableau of nightmare ritual. The two remaining corrupted werewolves stood in the shallow pool. One, the one with the higher, crueler voice, held the heavy, disc-like seal stone aloft. The other, the leader, Kale's brother, stood facing the spring's source, a trickle of water from the rock. The full moon's light, somehow channeled through a shaft in the cavern's ceiling, painted a perfect silver circle on the water's surface. It was beginning to brighten, to bleed into the pool itself. "Now, brother," the leader growled, his voice a gravelly distortion. "Place the key." "It is done," the second snarled, heaving the stone. It landed in the center of the moonlit patch with a deep thrum that vibrated through the stone beneath Alara's palms. The water around it swirled, the glow intensifying, shifting from cool blue to a lurid, hungry silver. Kale's breath hitched against her neck. A low, pained rumble escaped his chest. His consciousness, which had been a guiding pulse in her mind since the clearing, a compass of scent and instinct, sharpened into a blade of pure, desperate will. Now. It must be now. The thought wasn't her own, but it was crystalline in her mind. The spirit's words echoed. A human hand must turn the seal, guided by a wolf's will. The corrupted leader threw back his head, a howl of triumph beginning to form in his distorted throat. The second crouched, dipping his maw toward the shimmering water. Alara didn't think. She moved. She shoved away from the ledge, dropping the last few feet to the chamber floor. The impact jarred her knees, but she rolled, coming up in a crouch. The sound caught the corrupted's attention. Two massive, shaggy heads swiveled toward her, eyes like molten copper fixed on her small, human form. "The pet returns," the leader rasped, a grotesque smile stretching his muzzle. "To witness the birth of gods." "She's mine," the second hissed, abandoning the water and starting toward her. "No," Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. She held up her hands, palms outward. They were still stained with Kale's dried blood and now smeared with fresh dirt from the fissure. "I'm here to finish this." She sprinted, not away from them, but toward the pool. A roar of fury filled the chamber. The second corrupted lunged, a blur of matted fur and claws. Alara felt the wind of his passage, heard the snap of his jaws inches from her shoulder. But Kale's will was in her, a predator's reflexes superimposed on her own. She ducked, twisted, and felt a searing pain across her back as a claw grazed her. The force of the miss sent the beast crashing into a stalagmite with a sickening crack of stone and bone. She didn't look back. The water was ice cold as she plunged into the pool, the glowing silver light burning her eyes. The seal stone was just ahead, humming with power. She could see intricate markings on its surface now, swirling patterns that seemed to move in the moonlight. The leader was waiting for her. He stood between her and the stone, his form immense, blocking the light. "You have spirit, little human," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A worthy final morsel for the old world." He swiped at her. It was a casual, contemptuous blow meant to crush. Alara threw herself sideways, but the water slowed her. The tip of a claw caught her ribs, and white-hot agony lanced through her side. She cried out, stumbling, the water now stained pink around her. "Get up!" Kale's voice a snarl in her soul. The stone. From the ledge above, a shadow detached and fell. It was Kale. He hit the chamber floor on all fours, his transformation ragged and incomplete. Patches of fur sprouted from bleeding skin, his limbs caught between man and wolf, his eyes pure, feral amber. He was a broken, pain-racked thing, driven only by final, defiant loyalty. He launched himself at the leader, not with grace, but with the sheer, suicidal momentum of a falling tree. The two brothers collided with a sound like boulders breaking. Snarls, the wet tear of flesh, the crunch of bone. They rolled into the pool, a tangle of fury, darkening the silver light with blood. It was the distraction she needed. Gasping, her side screaming, Alara slogged the last few steps. Her fingers closed on the edge of the seal stone. It was warm, almost alive. The markings pulsed under her touch. Turn it, the Heartspring's spirit whispered, not in her ears, but in the water itself. Turn it with your purpose, with his will. She looked over her shoulder. Chaol was losing. The leader, larger and fully embraced by his corrupted form, had him pinned, jaws closing on Chaol's vulnerable throat. Alara poured everything into her hands. Her fear, her gratitude for the wolves who had led her to safety, her grief for Alaric, her fierce, protective rage for Chaol. She felt the echo of Chaol's own will, not just to survive, but to protect his pack's legacy, to honor his father, to save her. The human hand, the wolf's will. She twisted the stone. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, grinding groan echoed from the very heart of the mountain. The silver light in the water snuffed out instantly, plunging the chamber into the dim, cool blue of the moss. The channeled moonlight from above seemed to hit an invisible barrier, diffusing into a harmless, gray glow. A shuddering wail of pure anguish erupted from the leader. He released Chaol, staggering back. The corruption in him seemed to recoil. The feral, permanent bestial rage in his eyes flickered, and for a terrifying second, Alara saw something else, a glimpse of a man, horrified and trapped, before the rot swallowed it again. The connection to the spring's amplifying power had been severed. "What have you done?" he screamed, his voice raw. Chaol, bleeding from a dozen new wounds, crawled through the water toward Alara. He placed his body, once more, between her and the threat. The second corrupted wolf was stirring by the shattered stalagmite, shaking his head. The leader's pain twisted into renewed, desperate fury. "The power is denied. Then we take the old way. We tear out the heart of the Blackwood legacy with our teeth." He pointed a claw at Chaol. "Starting with you, little brother. And we will keep your pet alive long enough to watch us devour everything you were." He charged. The other wolf, limping, joined him. Chaol met Alara's eyes. In his wolfish face she saw no fear, only a deep, sad resolve and a silent plea. Run. She wouldn't, not again. As the two corrupted closed in, Alara did the only thing she could think of. She knelt in the water beside Chaol, placed her blood-stained hands on his heaving side, and reached for that psychic link, not to borrow, but to give. She poured her own will, her human tenacity, her refusal to abandon him, back down the bond forged by his blood. Chaol shuddered. A final, powerful ripple went through him. The ragged transformation solidified. Where there had been a broken, half-formed creature, now stood a wolf. Not the monstrous, twisted form of the corrupted, but a majestic, powerful black wolf with intelligent, weary amber eyes. He was still grievously wounded, but he was whole. He rose to face his brothers. The fight was brutal and short. The corrupted had strength and rage, but Chaol had purpose, and the last, pure essence of the Blackwood pack flowing through him. He moved with a lethal, efficient grace. When the second wolf lunged, Chaol met him midair, his jaws finding the throat with a precision that was more execution than brawl. The corrupted gurgled and fell, twitching into the water, which began to darken around him. The leader howled in fury and grief. "You were always the weak one, clinging to the skin, to the man." He launched a frenzied, final assault. Chaol was tired. A claw caught his hind leg, buckling it. The leader saw the opening and went for the kill. Alara didn't hesitate. She scooped up a shard of the broken stalagmite, a heavy, sharp piece of stone. She wasn't a warrior. She was a lost hiker. But she was also now part of this. As the leader reared over Chaol, she drove the stone shard into the beast's side, with all her strength and all her weight. The corrupted wolf roared, swinging backhanded. The blow sent Alara flying. She hit the chamber wall with a breath-stealing thud and slid down, the world graying at the edges. But her attack had been enough. Distracted, pained, the leader's strike at Chaol faltered. Chaol's head snaked up, his jaws closing with final, crushing force on the leader's muzzle. There was a terrible, splintering crack. The leader's roar died. He stumbled back, his jaw hanging useless. Chaol stood, panting, over his fallen brother. The leader looked up, his eyes for the first time clear of the raging corruption. They were just eyes, full of pain and regret and a terrible ancient sadness. He looked at Cale, then at the sealed spring, then at the tombs of his ancestors lining the vault. "Father," he gurgled, blood filling his throat. "We just wanted to be strong." He shuddered once and was still. Silence descended on the heart spring chamber, broken only by the drip of water and Cale's ragged breathing. The corrupted forms on the floor began to shift, to shrink. The unnatural, bestial features receded, leaving behind the bodies of 3 men, broken and pale in the mosslight. Cale's brothers. Cale limped over to Alara. The great black wolf nudged her gently with his nose. A whine escaped him. "I'm okay," she whispered, though every part of her hurt. "I think—" The transformation took him then, not a violent shift, but a slow, painful unraveling. Fur receded, bones realigned with soft, sickening pops. In moments, it was Cale the man who knelt naked and shivering beside her, his body a map of brutal wounds, old and new. He looked at the bodies of his brothers, his face a mask of profound exhaustion and sorrow. Then his eyes found hers. "You turned the seal." "We did," she said. He gave a slow, pained nod. Then his eyes fluttered shut and he collapsed. Alara didn't know how long she sat there, holding Cale's head in her lap, applying pressure to the worst of his wounds with strips torn from her already ruined shirt. The chamber was a tomb in every sense. The spirit of the spring was silent, its work done. Eventually, Cale stirred. His eyes opened, focusing on her with difficulty. "The moon," he rasped. "Gone from the shaft," she said. "It's just the moss light now. Then it is over, the spring is safe. The corruption ends with them." He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back. "You should go, follow the stream out. You'll find the trail by dawn." "I'm not leaving you here," Alara said, her voice firm. "I am the last," he said, the words heavy. "The Blackwood pack ends with me. There is nothing for you here but ghosts and blood." Alara looked around the chamber. At the ancient tombs, at the still pool now just water, at the bodies. Then she looked down at her hands, still stained with his blood, and felt the faint, fading echo of their link. It wasn't a bond of magic anymore, but something else. Something forged in a desperate night. "You led me to safety," she said quietly. "When you were being hunted, you put yourself between me and them. Your father died to give me a chance. This," she gestured to the vault, "this isn't just a tomb, it's a legacy. And you're not the last, not while I remember." Cale stared at her, something unreadable flickering in his exhausted eyes. It took hours, and it was the hardest physical ordeal of her life, but she managed it. She helped Cale, leaning heavily on her, out of the heart spring chamber, back through the fissure, and into the upper vault. They avoided the main entrance, still littered with the signs of Alaric's last stand, and found another, smaller tunnel the spirit must have subtly guided her toward, a back way out. They emerged into the forest as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the pines. The air was clean and cold, washing away the scent of blood and damp stone. In a small, sheltered clearing near a trickling creek, Alara helped Cale sit against a tree trunk. She built a small fire, using the survival skills she'd ironically come to the wilderness to practice. She cleaned his wounds as best she could with creek water. He watched her in silence, his strength slowly, incrementally returning. "The pack is gone," he said finally as she tied off a bandage. "The territory is empty. What will you do?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "The sickness is sealed, the spring is protected. The duty my father gave me is done." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You are free to return to your world, Alara. You never asked for any of this." She poked the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "My world was just noise. I came here to get lost. I found," she met his gaze, "something else. A monster. A protector," she corrected softly. "A man who remembers his humanity, even when it hurts." The rising sun broke over the peaks, bathing the clearing in warm, golden light. It touched Cale's face, and for the first time, Alara saw not just the pain and the warrior, but the man beneath. Tired, grieving, but alive. "The Blackwood pack," Cale said, the words tentative, as if testing a new idea, "was never just about blood. It was about the pact, the balance, protecting this place." He glanced at her. A human hand turned the seal. Alara's heart beat a little faster. Guided by a wolf's will, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face. "The territory is empty," he repeated, "but it does not have to be barren." He reached out, his hand large and scarred, and covered hers where it rested on the moss. His touch was warm. The last echo of their psychic link hummed, not with borrowed senses, but with a new, fragile understanding. In the distance, a bird began to sing, heralding the new day. The nightmare of the full moon was over. The desperate wolves had led the woman to safety, and she, in turn, had helped lead the last wolf back from the brink to a different kind of den under a sun-dappled sky. It wasn't an ending. It was a first, fragile beginning.